We'll move on to another question in the audience, which comes from Cecilia Cox.
Hi. A common misconception is that religion and reason are incompatible. In light of Kevin Rudd's comments this week, do you think this myth is finally being dispelled?
OK, this obviously comes from Kevin Rudd's welcome speech to the World Youth Day pilgrims, in which he said religion and reason are not incompatible, and then repeated it. David Marr.
Completely incompatible when it comes down to it in the end. Not all elements of religion, of course, because there are fundamentally good elements of religion. But religions are filled with illogicalities that are impossible to square with any kind of rational belief. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church has imported to this country for this week's celebrations a dead body to be venerated in churches around Sydney. Now, what is that about? What is the logic of that? The Roman Catholic Church and a number of other churches are locked in a refusal to understand the scientific basis of human sexuality. A number of teachings which cause immense distress and sometimes harm to people all around the world. It's a struggle with science which we know from experience will always be won by science. The Church has stood out for a long time against a number of scientific truths, but they always cave in. A lot of pain along the way, they always cave in. Now, faith and belief can be wonderful things, but up against logic, they have to give way to logic. Otherwise, they devolve into systems which are usually cruel, hampering, and claustrophobic. In the end, it's logic that is what takes us forward.
Okay. Angela Shanahan.
Sorry, I didn't realise David hadn't finished. Science and faith are compatible. In fact, as you probably know, the first scientists were priests. But it isn't just that. I look at the world around me. I look at what has occurred, for example, as a result of the sexual revolution of 30 and 40 years ago. I look at young people who are struggling to make head and tail out of all this, literally. I look at the falling birth rate. I look at families breaking down, and I wonder, even if I was not a religious person, which I freely admit I am, would I not think that perhaps the moral laws that we have lived with for generations, and which the Church reinforces by its teachings on sexuality, did they not stand us in good stead?
Lindsay Tanner, let's hear from you.
I think in some respects the role of religion and reason in mass society is pretty similar to the role that reason and emotion plays within each of us, that neither really should be allowed to totally dominate, and so I think there's a certain complementary nature to the two. And I find the notion of reason taking over completely pretty scary, frankly. I think ultimately, like David Marr, that logic and reason ultimately always will eventually prevail and should prevail. But we've seen circumstances throughout the 20th century where you've had societies purportedly based on total reason that have been totalitarian and led to all kinds of horrors. So you could use the pursuit of science to justify Dr. Mengele experimenting on people in concentration camps, for example. So although ultimately I'll end up, if there's a conflict, predominantly on the side of reason, I think it's very important that reason is not completely unadulterated by what is ultimately the expression of human emotion, in the same way that none of us can live our lives according to just pure reason. We are emotional beings as well. I'm not really religious. I'm an Anglican, and I'm not really a spiritual person. But I think it's profoundly important that we've got religion of some form or other, particularly the modern kinds of religion that by and large doesn't run around burning people at the stake or doing these kind of things that have happened in the past in our societies. And yes, some religious figures, some churches do play I think, a pretty bad role on certain issues, the persecution of gays in our society, for example. I think that is an issue that people are entitled to question. But nonetheless, that's not a reason for saying abolish religion, have a society run on pure reason, because if you have a society run on pure reason, you'll end up with extremism built into the way the world works and all kinds of horrors. So I think it plays a very important role.
I just want to sort of contest this notion that there's religion and then there is reason, as though religion bears no relationship to reason. I mean, surely when you consider reason, you consider human beings as they are. And I think within many human beings in this country, and no doubt everywhere else around the world, there is a yearning for not just money and practical material things, but a yearning for some faith, some sense of, in particular, good and evil, some affection for the notion of love. And, well, you might say, if you put it as a dichotomy between religion and reason, that love is not really reason and logic. Love is an emotion. Love is more than that. All those different meanings of the word love, love of your home, love of your family, love of your lover, all of those things, they are matters of deep emotion. Deep emotion are absolutely fundamental to a human being. And I think they are very closely linked, intricately for me, linked to the whole concept of religion and God. And for people to say that reason is all that matters, reason and logic is all that matters. I'm a big one for reason and logic. I mean, it seems unreasonable and illogical, for example, to be left-wing. That's my view.
But full of love.
Full of love.
Yes,
Speak for yourself, David. Speak for yourself.
Can we get that shot again?
Aren't we enjoying the new Alexander Downer?
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
Theology
Always been the same.
and love, and we're not even...
No, only a few minutes in. Rose Jackson, let me... well, I hate to see what he's let me like at the end of the show. There is the green room.
We're working on him.
There is the green room for that gentleman. Just steady on. Now, Rose Jackson, let me ask you, bring it right back down to earth. The Prime Minister made that comment, so I'm wondering, you as an aspiring young Labor politician, is it an advantage, a political advantage, to have a Prime Minister who is a believer to the degree that Kevin Rudd is?
I think that it's really important that in our society, in our political society, that there's a reflection of what our general society is like. So you've got religious people in general society and you don't. I'm personally not religious. I'm not a Catholic. I'm not of any faith. But that doesn't mean that, to me, the fact that Kevin Rudd is doesn't mean he's not a valid representation of me, because I think we each need to look outside ourselves and go, I might not be personally religious, but in our society there's plenty of people who are. So that in a political person, I think all of us can realise no political representative is going to exactly emulate us, exactly represent us. But I think that Kevin Rudd represents a religious man who is extremely reasonable, extremely patient, extremely caring. I'm a big Kevin Rudd fan, I'll admit, so you're not going to hear much criticism from me, but I really think he pulls off that... and it is tough, but he pulls off being a religious man, a deeply faithful man who can really make a connection to people who aren't. And I don't think that's very common, but I think he really pulls it off.
OK. Now, remember that Q&A is live from 9:30 in the Eastern States. Simply